today is a remarkably weird system. John Kenneth Galbraith, the famous economist of yesteryear, once pointed out that if people understood how money works, there would be a rebellion on the streets. There would be a revolution. I mean, they would simply be so angry that they would overthrow everything. And it is true, because if you come to think of it, I mean, you're in Canada, same thing in Canada as in the United States, as in Europe, as everywhere, around the capitalist world. All the money circulating in our economies, only 3% is produced by the state, by the central bank. The rest is produced by private bankers. We've given privateers, the right to make money out of thin air and to distribute it to whomever they want. And when they make too much money and the whole system crashes down upon them, then we bail them out. Now that is God's gift to a very satanic God's gift to very satanic people. And again, the way they create money out of thin air is so simple, so simple. Most people have in their heads the illusion that what banks do is they mediate between savers and borrowers. That, you go to the bank and you ask for a mortgage or for a loan to buy a car, and, so Jack is saving $50,000 in the bank, and then Jill goes around and asks for a $50,000 loan. So the bank takes Jack's $50,000, gives it to Jill, and charges Jill an interest rate which is higher than the interest rate the bank pays Jack. That's all what happened. When Jill goes to the bank and secures a $50,000 loan, this money comes from nowhere, from thin air. What the bank does is it simply adds 50,000, just types 50,000 in the computer, and it appears on the screen of the ATM when Jill puts her card in and takes a look at her balance. So the money has been created out of nothing, right? And the hope of the banker is that Jill is going to repay that plus interest. So essentially the 50,000 which was created from thin air will go back to thin air, and all that will be left is the interest that Jill pays the banker. The banker makes money out of that, out of thin air. Now imagine that we do something really very simple. We create a monetary commons, not a privateer commons, a privateer monetary system, which is what we have now, but a monetary commons. How could this happen? Well, imagine that your central bank effectively allows you to download on your phone a digital wallet and gives you a PIN. So you can ask your employer to put your money in there. And it goes to, in other words, you have just acquired the right that you don't have at the moment, which only private banks have. Because in your country, in every country, only the private bankers have the right to have an account with the central bank. You don't. Imagine if you did, and it was free. And the money you put in there gets the overnight standard interest rate of the central bank. Why not? I mean, you have an account with the central bank. Okay? And so, suddenly, there's no concern about losing your money if the private banker goes bankrupt. There's no need for bailouts anymore because it's a central bank that is backing your reserves, your savings. So suddenly, especially if you get the interest rate offered to the central bank, by the central bankers to the private bankers today, why would you want to have an account with a private bank? You wouldn't want. Then if the private bank wants to offer you a better deal, then they can. Okay, but it's very hard to see how they would be able to. So suddenly you have the nationalization of the money system. But because, as we speak today, in the present system, bankers lever up whatever money, real money they have from the central bank. They take $3 and to convert it to 100, right? As money goes from our private bank accounts to this digital wallet that belongs to a monetary commons, to the Fed, or to the Central Bank of Canada, which belongs to all Canadians, right? Then the money supply comes down very fast because of this money multiplier of the private bankers. The primary bankers, for every $3 they lose a capacity to create 100. So when you have this transfer of funds from the private sector to the public commons, to the digital wallets of the central bank, then the money supply comes down. But that means that the central bank can increase the money supply in order to keep it steady. And how does it increase that, in my view, right? Well, and this is what is described in another now, by giving everybody a monthly check, not check, but credit. And so you don't have inflation because the money supply is exactly the same. Simply by pushing money from the private sector banks to the monetary commons, you allow the monetary commons to create more money in order to pay effectively a basic income to everyone, which is quite large as well. And the money supply remains constant because of this migration of money from private banks to the monetary commons. And suddenly you have a basic income which liberates so many people from the drudgery of everyday life. It allows them to be creative. It allows care work and non-monetary work, which is important for society, to be remunerated and to be done without people having to do 2 or 3 jobs on the side in order to support the care work that they offer society. And essentially you empower the many to be able to strike better deals with one another because they're no longer desperate. Because if you're desperate, if you lack alternatives to a terrible contract that is offered to you, you will accept it. So exploitation goes away and it would unleash amazing innovative powers. People will be able to try their hand at different projects, to create startups, either social startups or entrepreneurial ones that will at some point flourish, or at least a proportion of them will. And therefore it changes completely the complexion of society. So a monetary commons would be a major revolution, especially if it goes hand in hand with the end of the labor market. Because remember, when you change corporate law and you have one employee, one share, one vote, there's no longer a labor market because there's no longer a distinction between profit and wage, and there's no longer a distinction between the owners of capital and the workers for capital. So all these, this combination of one person, one employee, one share, and one vote at the level of the firm, and the monetary commons at the level of the broader macroeconomy, that brings about a libertarian communism. Why does Elon Musk work? He doesn't need the money. Why does Jeff Bezos work? There is absolutely no logical base to this objection. Because, why did Picasso work? Did he work for the money? I think that, if you stop Picasso from drawing, he would die. It's really very simple. Because you can't stop working as a creative human being. Now, when it comes to shitty jobs, working in the sewers, working in, flipping burgers and so on. Well, firstly, we need a lot less work of that kind. This precarious work, it goes hand in hand with production of stuff like McDonald's that we need less of. So if there's less work being done in that industry, then it's a better thing. But of course, there are, as I said, the sewers are a good example of something that needs to be done. Well, then we need to pay people a lot more for doing. I mean, at the moment, the most essential work, and we saw this during the pandemic. During the pandemic, we knew what essential workers were, right? And supposedly we clapped and applauded them from balconies during the lockdown and so on, but we still paid them a bloody pittance. Right? Well, pay them more than we pay Jeff Bezos. They are more significant. So that's my answer. By the way, this idea that unless people starve, they don't have any incentive to work. It's an idea that the rich propagate for the poor, but not for their own kids. They create trust funds for their kids so that they always have a basic income. And they never worry that their kids will not want to be creative and and do important things. They never say, I'm going to give you a trust fund, even though I know that you will be a lazy, good for nothing person. So, Bill Gates' kids, Jeff Bezos' kids, they will all have a trust fund. And there will still be an expectation that they are going to be creative people and they will do stuff. They just don't want the poor to have a trust fund. And that really fills me with nothing but contempt for their argument. As for the universal basic services, look, it is a preposterous error to pit universal basic services with universal basic income or against universal basic income. Why? We need both. So, if you're ill and you need immediate treatment, you should get it. And that should be a non-market activity. It's a basic human right. You should immediately be treated. End of story. At the same time, you should have a basic income. So you can go around and have a dignified life, buy the essentials, go to the theater. In ancient Athens, there was a provision for free theater tickets to the poor. And they actually gave them the money to buy the tickets with. So why is the either or? I never understood that. Their big mistake is they assume that UBI must be funded through taxation or government spending. It doesn't. It is to be funded or should be funded through a monetary commons, through the transfer of our monies from the private sector banks to the monetary commons. And then immediately, if you have a multiplier of 10, let's say, and maybe you have a multiplier of more than 10, if you shift a money multiplier, right, of 10, that is for every $1 that the state bank, the central bank has produced, the private sector produces another 10. Then by shifting our savings, let's say, our deposits to the monetary commons, we unleash 90% more spending power without introducing any inflationary pressures. So this is why years ago, 30 years ago, I was unhappy with the idea of UBI. I never supported it in the 1990s when it first came out, because everybody was talking about essentially the proponents of UBI, the initial proponents of UBI were talking about funding it through taxation. And that would be catastrophic. Because if you go to a blue collar worker, especially somebody who's voted for Trump, and you say to them that I'm going to tax you in order to give a basic income to a surfer in LA, or to a drug addict, or to somebody who doesn't want to work, or somebody who wants to be an artist, whatever, they will, that's it. This is politically toxic. That's why my conversion to UBI, which I call the universal basic dividend, not the income so much, was complete when I started thinking that you don't need to tax. And you don't need to create new monies in order to provide a proper basic payment or a trust fund for everyone, essentially. You simply need to socialize or nationalize the monetary system in what I term a monetary. Well, look, at the moment, because the services big tech provides us are free, then we become fodder in their algorithms, and we become essentially what I call in my book, Capitalism, cloud serfs, working diligently and voluntarily, the worst form of slavery, in order to reproduce the cloud capital of big tech. What is the alternative? The alternative is that these services are not free, and our data is not theirs. So the latter is covered by a digital rights bill, which ensures that whatever I produced on the internet, or you produced, whatever you have uploaded, your own followers, your likes, dislikes, everybody else's likes and dislikes of what you say and what you post, they're yours. And you have property rights over them. And if anybody wants to use them, to train their AI bots to, before answering this question about how it actually functions differently under a socialist cooperative system, it is important to note that there are no institutional changes one can bring to bear upon government that would work, that would truly democratize government, if you maintain the near monopoly or oligopoly of economic power in the hands of the very few. So the transformation of the way in which businesses work is a prerequisite for their being in a position to do anything about democratizing government. So let me just state that. Okay, so first you change corporate law. You move towards a system of what I call in the book one person or one employee, one member, one share, one vote, which is a very radical departure from the structure of capitalism, where you've got the very few who do not work in a company owning and controlling it, and the very many who operate and function and work and labor in the company who do not own it. So that needs to go. If that doesn't go, along with a monetary system which is monopolized by a few bankers who effectively have the capacity to print money and to distribute it any way they want with the backing of the state. So once you remove the monopoly of the capitalist class over capital and of the bankers over money, then you can come to the question that you posed and answer it. So I'm answering another question. In the book, in Another Now, I sketch out a system of government where elections have been more or less replaced or at least largely augmented by a jury system. The idea comes from ancient Athens because, the whole idea of democracy comes from back then. Not that our democracies today have anything to do with that, but at least the idea of a system which empowers the many, who are by definition the less fortunate ones, the poorer. This is Aristotle's definition of democracy. Democracy, according to Aristotle, was a system in which the poor were in control of the government. And why the poor? Because the poor are in the majority, or the relatively poor. Back then, in ancient Athens, the clash was between the Democrats and the Aristocrats. The establishment versus the Democrats. And the Democrats, interestingly, were not in favor of elections because they assumed, quite rightly so, that elections can be manipulated by the aristocrats, by the rich. Back then, imagine now, today, with social media and Google and Meta and all that. So instead of elections, the Democrats were advocating a random selection amongst the citizenry of office holders. Now, the problem, of course, with that is that, even though it worked in Athens because it was a very small place, even judges were randomly selected. And the jury system today in the United States, in Canada, in Britain and so on, in Europe, emanates from that. That is the idea of the jury system, the randomly selected citizen that makes decisions on behalf of the many. Now, in large complex societies, of course, you can't have everybody being represented in the assembly and juries being selected through there. But you can have a jury system augmenting the decision-making process. So, for instance, let me give you an example. There's a lot of discussion today about the independence of the central bank. This is all rubbish, of course, because the central bank of Canada, the central bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, they're not independent at all. They're utterly dependent on the bankers. They are controlled and owned effectively by the private bankers. So when they talk about central bank independence, effectively they're talking about independence from the public, from the demos. But imagine if you had a governing council of the central bank, which was comprising randomly selected people from within certain cohorts, some experts, some members of the public, some trade unionists, and so on. And amongst them, every year you have a random draw, and there is a governing council of the central bank. Imagine if every local authority is run by a committee which must be answerable, accountable to a jury of citizens that are randomly selected. Imagine a parliament which is elected, but at the same time, whose subcommittees are powerful subcommittees, as there are very powerful in the Senate and so on. Nevertheless, however, they are selected by a random lot, again through sortition, by members of the public, in conjunction with corporations that have been democratized through one employee, one share, one vote, and with a money system, a monetary system, which is a monetary commons, as I like to call it, which I describe also in the book, in Another Now. That triangle, if you want, of democratization, of democratizing processes, creates a genuine democracy. There's no doubt that the kind of central planning that the Soviet Union tried, and not very successfully, to turn into a good substitute for the market, that could work far, far better today, given the algorithms. So, as I keep saying, and some people look at me askance when I say that, Amazon.com would have been the wet dream of the Gosplan, economic planning ministry in Moscow. Because that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to replace the market with an algorithm that matched the productive capacities of different units, so different factories, different farms, and so on across the Soviet Union, with the needs, the consumer desires on the other. And in the Soviet Union, because they were doing it with pen and paper, more or less, it wasn't working very well. But today, with Amazon's type of algorithm, it can be done. But the question is, this algorithm, what would it be optimized to do? In the case of Amazon, we know what it is optimized to do, to maximize the cloud rents, or the proceeds, if you want, of Jeff Bezos, of the owner of the algorithm. That's a very straightforward objective to give to the coders of the Amazon algorithm. But when it comes to society, let's say that we usurp and take this algorithm, and we try to create a Gosplan, a universal society-wide or economy-wide economic planning system using such an algorithm. So suppose it's you and me sitting there and trying to say, okay, now let's optimize this algorithm. What would be the objective function? I mean, the case of Bezos is really very simple: maximize his bottom line. What is the bottom line of society? Each one of us has a different view of what the bottom line of society is. One person may want more emphasis on organic agriculture. The other one may want more emphasis on the arts and education, and so on and so forth. So, centralizing the algorithm, I'm sure it would be far better than what we have now under this techno-feudal order or this capitalist order, call it what you might. But it would not be my ideal solution, because my ideal solution is a genuine libertarian communism, a genuine combination of the maximum freedom with a common ownership of the means of production, of the means of communication, of the means of exchange, and so on. To bring together freedom, liberty, and the commons. I think we need to have a very decentralized system for deciding what I do, what you do. Because if you have an algorithm which works on a centrally planned basis, deciding what happens in society, essentially we are all subservient to that algorithm. And this is where markets come in. You have to remember, I mean, by the way, let me, for the purposes of full disclosure, make it clear that I am dyed-in-the-wool Marxist. So, having said that, my concern is that we make a mistake when we identify capitalism with markets. Capitalism is not about markets. It's about the labor market being a non-market, because the labor market is only partially. The moment you sign a labor contract and you enter a company, you exit the labor market. You enter a feudal relationship with your employer. So the problem with capitalism is the labor market and the money market. These two markets are the ones that create the circumstances for widespread exploitation, for the inequities, for the crisis-prone nature of the capitalist system, and so on. There is nothing the matter with you. If you have an apple and I have an orange, you and me trading, I like your apple more than you like it, and you like my orange more than I like it, and we trade. So that's a voluntary transaction that is perfectly compatible with a socialist, libertarian, communist society. So as long as we do away with the labor market and the money market, then the market system can be a splendid way of combining the commons with freedom to act and let 1,000 flowers bloom. So if our corporations are democratized with one person, one vote, one person, one share, one vote, if we have citizens' councils which decide how to channel our collective savings into particular areas where we want to invest, like green energy, for instance. Okay, if we can have similar councils deciding on a purely ancient Athenian democratic way the extent to which we protect the planet from too much cement, too much CO2. In other words, we plan together the degrowth of the economy while we're increasing prosperity, shared prosperity. If we have all that, then we can allow free transactions between people and corporations that are democratized to play the role of a decentralized algorithm. Essentially, it is an algorithm without an algorithmic design. So in that sense, I think that we're much closer to a libertarian communism if we let markets, freed from the tyranny of a capitalist class that owns the means of production and the capital goods, freed of the bankers who own the money system, to get on with the business of creating through a process of a spontaneous order, that which in the end society reveals it wants even before it realizes it. It's freedom. It's freedom. It's the freedom to choose your partners, to choose your manner in which you express your creativity, and to develop your capacities as a human being. Because, in the end, that's all that matters. The thing that really appalls me about the world that we live in is that most people's capacities, talents are being squashed by a regime of exploitation, by a regime which oppresses and which does not allow. The little Mozarts and the little Einsteins and the little, Dostoevskis to come out in the world. And we live in an affluent society. We produce collectively a lot more than what is necessary for everyone to have the opportunity to develop their talents. And yet, despite the fact that we have this collective wealth, it is so unevenly distributed because of the patterns of exploitation which are necessary in order to produce that wealth, given the capitalist relations of production and the techno-feudal power of the cloud capitalists, that we don't realize this potential.